The mecca of ufologists in Norway is a rather unremarkable mountain in Trøndelag. Supposedly, about 40 years ago, a flying saucer was spotted there. Since then, the mountain has attracted crowds of tourists, mainly from Trondheim, who don't actually see any UFOs, but have an excuse to get completely drunk in nature. Personally, I had never been to that mountain, and I considered all the tales about it to be little more than tourist bait. I didn't believe in little green men, and I did not believe in flying lights. That is, until I witnessed this phenomenon myself, twice. The first incident happened when my friends and I rented a boat to fish off the rocky shores of northern Norway, hoping to sell the catch to a local fish factory. We got the boat for connections, but none of us really knew how to steer it or manage the nets. We had not been sober for even an hour, and luckily, the Coast Guard did not stop us for inspection. After 3 days of struggling with nothing to show for it, almost running aground a few times, and with booze running low, we decided to give up and swim back to the pier, which was about 5 hours away. One of our friends, who always got seasick when sober, was hurrying us up. Before heading back, we sat by the side of the boat to smoke. It was calm, and the waves, which had accompanied us the entire trip, had died down. The sun was setting, turning red, and reflecting in the water in sparkling strokes. While admiring the scenery, we suddenly noticed that one of the strokes seemed to move vertically, as if it was at odds with the others, rapidly approaching us. What had been a small streak soon grew into a shining red ball, almost like a second sun flying over the sea. The ball stopped about 50 meters away and hovered. We stared at it in shock for a few seconds, and then, just as quickly, it disappeared, like someone had turned off a light bulb. We were all in shock, but not scared. We just sat there, dumbfounded, for a couple of minutes before we decided to swim back. We tried to explain what we saw by calling it ball lightning. The second encounter occurred in the taiga of the Telemark region, and it did not resemble ball lightning at all. I was working there at a summer job in an underground warehouse full of mannequins. Yes, mannequins. The warehouse was temporary since the owner could not find another location, and there were only 3 farms in the area, one of which I stayed at with a friend. The work was creepy, having to check for mold on the mannequins every evening, transport them up in the elevator, change light bulbs, and so on. On the weekend, my friend invited me to swim at a local lake, since the nearest shower was several kilometers away. I did not know how to swim, and the water was barely warmer than a couple of degrees, but my friend, being local, assured me I just needed to get used to it. His speech was interrupted when a huge herd of cows suddenly appeared from behind the pines, surrounding us and mooing. The cows were free range, as my friend explained. Although in Norway, only sheep are usually free range. There was nothing dangerous, but we decided to swim somewhere quieter. After gathering firewood, booze, and a guitar, we set off for a nearby shore that my friend promised had a beach with a nice view of the mountains. The cows followed us, but we managed to lose them after almost falling into a quagmire. When we arrived at the beach, it turned out to be rocky and even colder since it was exposed to the wind. We lit a fire and started playing some Bob Dylan songs on the guitar. In Telemark, summer nights are dark, but true darkness does not fall until after midnight. It was around 3 a.m. when we decided to leave, despite the swampy and rocky terrain and the lack of paths, because my friend knew the area well. Then we saw it. The clouds in the sky were glowing. It was a new moon, and there were no bright polar lights in Telemark, so the light was clearly artificial. That light started moving left and right, and we thought it might be the headlights of an SUV driving uphill through the forest, shining on the clouds. But the light started moving quickly, over long distances, as if it was some kind of hysterically moving spotlight. It became even stranger when the light separated from the clouds, descended as a glowing stripe, and then suddenly rose back up, forming a luminous square. It then began to spiral. This went on for half an hour before it disappeared, and soon after, dawn broke. The following year, I visited the same friend again. His elderly neighbor, who often saw this strange phenomenon from her window, told us that she had even recorded it on camera. I think she even posted it online, though I could not find it. She considered it a natural anomaly. Something similar happened in the early 2000s when a Russian Bulava missile went off course and crashed, creating spiral patterns in the night sky over northern Norway. But Bulava missiles don't fall in the same place in Norway multiple times a year. However, an even stranger story was told to me by an old, half-blind farmer from a neighboring valley. I had stopped by his farm on the way to the Stavanger to buy some moonshine. When he was a child, he had been sledding with his grandmother in the winter near a burial mound. Yes, a real Viking burial mound near his farm. Pieces from an old Viking chessboard were even found there. One winter evening, as they were walking home in the dark, they saw the same strange light in the sky. This time, the light ran across the sky, concentrated into a bright ball, and landed on the road ahead of them, about 100 meters away, illuminating everything around. Then, just as quickly, it took off and slowly faded. His grandmother passed away a week later, and the farmer himself went blind, hardly able to see since that night. It happened near a forest lake, known in certain circles as Machine Gun Pond. Back in the 90s, the Norwegian mafia had a shootout there with some visiting Russian gangsters. Negotiations apparently did not go well. The Russians, seemingly channeling Brother 2, pulled a machine gun out of their car and opened fire, yelling something patriotic like, "This is for the people who survived the siege, you bastards." After we finished rural high school, my friends and I decided to skip the usual graduation pants and heavy drinking, standard Norwegian tradition, but we still wanted to do something memorable before university. So, we came up with the idea of staging a berserker-style axe fight by that lake, since one of us had a dacha nearby. To make it feel more authentic, we downed some free Sevens vodka, and a few of us ate fly agaric mushrooms. I played the role of the skeptic, joking that the whole berserkers eating mushrooms thing was just a myth made up by Swedish priests in the 18th century. We did have some protection: axes wrapped in rags, fireproof goggles, gloves, homemade chainmail, and bike helmets. Things were going fine until the rag flew off my opponent's axe. The real problem was not the rag, it was that we both got distracted by it, and his axe flew within millimeters of my face. That is when we decided we had had enough and went to bed, lol. I could not fall asleep. Eventually, I noticed my lower lip was bleeding, badly enough that the pillow was soaked. It was dark, but I felt the wetness and realized something was wrong. Our axes were sharp, so one must have clipped me. It had sliced through my lip like paper, deep, but I had not even felt it. Turns out, the others could not sleep either. We drank a bit more, completely forgetting alcohol thins the blood, and we figured we would sleep it off. If it was still bleeding in the morning, we would go to the doctor. But by morning, the pillow and some of the sheets were stained brown with dried blood, and it still had not stopped. While we were trying to figure out how we would explain all of this at a clinic, an old woman suddenly appeared outside the window, waving at us. She was a local healer and clairvoyant who rented land to the parents of the guy whose dacha we were at. She came in, saw my lip, whispered something, and just like that, the bleeding stopped. Could have been a coincidence, but when the cut healed a week later, there was not even a scar. She told us we had better not mess around with axes again. I asked, "Wait, how do you know about the axes? We never told you." Then I remembered, she is a clairvoyant after all. What is wild is that she did all of this for free, unlike most so-called healers. It is worth mentioning that the old woman was Romani, but not in the modern sense. She was descended from Norway's original Romani, who arrived centuries ago. Most people forget about them because their history clashes with Norway's tidy national image. Up until the 1990s, Romani were sent to labor camps, had their kids taken away, and were even forcibly sterilized. Not because they were criminals, but because they refused to settle down and pay taxes. They lived as traveling blacksmiths and fishermen, Anyway, she immediately treated me like family, called me her brother-in-law, and invited me to visit. As we walked past the lake, she asked, "Son, do you know if someone has drowned here lately? The lake feels angry." That creeped me out. Could someone really have drowned? Sure enough, the next day, a drunk fisherman went under. She had been off by a day, but still, no one saved him. There is a small coastal village in northern Norway where I stayed several times with a friend. The village harbour used to be bustling with fishmongers, but about 20 years ago, it burned down so badly that the decision was made not to restore it. Since then, the village has slowly fallen into disrepair. The only entertainment left is probably the abandoned huts. There are no jobs, and the remaining residents are mainly fishermen and farmers. Oddly enough, there are still some young people in the village, though they have to travel an hour by bus to attend school or college. In winter, the young people rent rooms in boarding schools. I have never heard any ghost stories from there, and although the abandoned huts have been cleared out, the atmosphere is still eerie. The village has its share of wartime bunkers, and the older generation has some strange quirks. One of the more peculiar figures was a pensioner maniac who lived there years ago. One of the more normal old people, the one I know best, is an eccentric botanist granny who collects coconuts, sometimes washed ashore by ocean currents. This phenomenon is rare in southern Norway, making her collection all the more unique. One strange story I heard happened to the neighbor of that old woman. This man, a local, had worked as a loader in Australia and had fought with the partisans during the war. One day, in the 70s, he decided to go fishing. He sailed a short distance from the village, just a little offshore, when he noticed something odd, an island on the horizon, covered in fir trees. But this was strange, because there had never been any island there before, only rocky shoals, and forests could not grow on them. The old man, who had fished in these waters since childhood, was sure that there had never been an island there. Intrigued, he decided to row toward it. As he got closer, he realized that the trees were naturally black. Trees can appear dark in winter, but this was summer, and the trees had a pitch black color, even though the sun was shining from the side, not behind them. He rowed onto the island, where everything seemed normal at first, sand and pine needles that were the usual yellow color. But something was off about the fir trees. Every needle was jet black. Then, things got stranger. Despite the area being home to plenty of seagulls, there were no birds on the island. A complete silence hung in the air. The old man, although not particularly superstitious, began to feel uneasy. He probably would have swum back to the boat right then and there. But what made him turn around in fear was not just the eerie silence. It was the presence of a huge shadow moving between the trees. At first, he mistook it for a rock, but when he looked again, he realized it resembled a tall, 5-meter figure that seemed to shift slightly without making a sound. Whether it was a hallucination or not, the old man decided he had had enough and hurried back to the boat. He rowed away from the island, too scared to even glance back. Halfway to his village, a thick fog rolled in. He decided to wait it out until evening. Back then, there was a lighthouse in the village, so he thought he could use it as a guide if the fog did not clear. But as night fell, there was no light from the lighthouse, even though there should have been, and the village was visible from the opposite shore. The old man sat in his boat, confused and in complete darkness. He fell asleep in the boat. When he woke up, his boat had washed up on an unfamiliar shore. He went ashore to find people, and soon realized he had arrived in Brønnøysund, a town about 100 kilometers from his village, and not even on the same sea currents. The strange part came later though. When he returned to his village by bus, he learned that he had been missing for a whole week. The villagers had thought he had drowned, and they had even contacted the authorities to search for him. I am not sure what to make of this story, but recently, the grandson of the old man confirmed it to me. It is possible the old man invented it, but his disappearance remains unexplained, and he may have been at the pub during that time. The second strange story from the village is more recent and has to do with youth and crime. Easter is considered a cursed time in the village. Every year, without fail, some sort of crime happens around Easter, often for no apparent reason. The situation is so serious that a cop now comes to maintain order during Easter, but despite his presence, the crime still happens. Strangely, no newspapers have covered the curse yet. It all started in 2014. There was a party over Easter, and people from the neighboring farms came. One man got drunk and had an argument with his girlfriend, which led her to throw herself off of a cliff in despair. Miraculously, she did not die but became disabled. The man, devastated by her injuries, killed himself a few days later. The following Easter, 2 farmers went fishing for salmon. For some unknown reason, one of them stabbed the other with a knife, brutally, in a manner reminiscent of the character from No Country for Old Men. This man was not known to drink, so no one could explain why he had suddenly snapped. On Easter 2015, a seemingly normal 9th grader broke into the local postwoman's house and brutally hacked her to death with an axe. It seemed like an isolated incident, but the following Easter, things escalated. 2 psychopaths driving through the village had their car break down. They stopped the first car they came across, killed the driver, doused the body with gasoline, and set it on fire on the beach. Then, they simply drove away in the stolen car. They were caught soon after. In 2017, the local elders finally called the police, but the officer insisted people should calm down and not give in to superstition. Nonetheless, the curse continued. That Easter, a group of local teenagers climbed into an old bunker, bringing explosives to experiment with. One of them died in the explosion, which was caused by explosives sold to them by a local man with an eccentric obsession to blow up a regional court building. He had kept homemade explosives near a radiator, so it was a miracle the explosion did not happen in his house. The cop finally admitted something strange was going on, but the following Easter, 2018, a motorcycle accident occurred. A young man was riding when his head was nearly severed by a wire stretched across the road. He crashed into a tree, but survived with just a bad cut on his neck and a broken leg. The culprits were never found, but it was suspected that local youths were responsible. The subsequent Easters continued to bring deaths. In 2019, a local drug addict died, and in 2020, 2 elderly men, possibly from cancer or the pandemic. Strangely, in 2019, the only death in the village was that of a drug addict. I am unsure whether anything happened in 2021, but I hope nothing did. Still, the villagers seem proud of this curse, though I can't say I find it something to boast about. In any case, the village is grim and full of oddities. They told me about this curse, not with fear, but with a strange sense of local pride. Honestly, it is a chilling place. Hey, I hope you've enjoyed the story so far. If you do and you want to hear more, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel, and leave a comment down below, as it lets the algorithm know that you like my content and it promotes it to more people. My goal for the channel is to hit 50,000 subscribers, and we're closing in fast, so thank you, and back to the stories. In Telemark, I heard an old tale several times, one that dates back centuries, from a sparsely populated valley northeast of Ryukyu. You know, the same town with the mirrors on the mountain, like in Andrei Platonov's story. A long time ago, a strange man lived in that valley. He was known for casting spells, carving runes, and even turning horses into wolves. And of course, he loved to get completely drunk and wander around the mountains like that. People warned him that it would end badly, either with him freezing to death or being burned by the Lutherans if he did not stop showing off. But he just laughed and said he would die a natural death in his own house. He also insisted that, when he died, he should not be buried, but instead hung from the ceiling in a stone coffin on brass chains. This, he claimed, would bring happiness to the valley. His death was not noticed right away, as no one ventured near his hut. But when his body was found, he was sitting at the table, reading the Bible. Just as he had requested, they put him in a stone coffin and hung it from the ceiling. The ceiling, made from thick pine logs, was strong enough to hold the weight. And sure enough, the valley became incredibly lucky. While the rest of the world faced cold, crop failures, and famine, the valley was untouched. The glaciation of mountain trade routes made all the merchants rush through there, and soon, what had been a poor backwater turned into the richest valley in Telemark. The locals even declared the man a saint, much to the priest's dismay. The priest complained to the bishop, who came, burned the peasant's hut to the ground, and ordered the coffin to be buried outside the church's fence. The next year, the cold weather finally ended, but plague, cattle deaths, and crop failures hit the valley. It quickly became a forsaken place again. Then, a gossiping old woman arrived in the valley, saying that rumors had spread about the mountain princess heading toward them. According to the tale, if someone shot her in the forehead, she would turn into an ordinary, beautiful girl, and the village of the one who married her would become the richest in the country. The old woman may have made up the princess herself, as she is a unique character in Norwegian folklore, appearing only in the story. The villagers, desperate and with nothing left to lose, eagerly took up the challenge. They set up guards throughout the forest and mountains, armed to the teeth. One boy, who was with his father when the plan was discussed, noticed there was no one posted on a small mountain near his house. He did not ask anyone about it, decided to go himself, figuring the princess might be his. There was also an abandoned hunting hut there, a relic of his great-great-grandfather. After sneaking a gun from his father, he went there and waited. Night fell. The boy did not light any candles and chose to sit in the dark. It got colder, and suddenly, he heard the crunch of branches outside the broken window. He pushed the barrel of his gun through the hole and peered into the darkness. In the moonlight, a slender girl with a crown appeared between the fir trees. The boy froze. The princess stood still, as though sensing she was being watched, and only her sniffling was audible. No wonder I've got a runny nose in this cold, the boy thought, snapping out of his daze. Realizing he was not dreaming, he fired directly at her head. She collapsed to the ground with a loud thud, as if she weighed a ton. The boy sat there, paralyzed, unsure of what to do. He had never encountered anything like this and did not know how to handle it. To his surprise, the princess did not revive. He stayed there until dawn and eventually fell asleep. When he woke up, he peeked out the window. To his astonishment, the body he had shot was lying between the trees, a deer. What he had mistaken for a crown was actually the deer's antlers. The princess had been turned toward him and, sensing he was watching, had frozen in place, terrified to move. No one ever spotted the princess again. However, the valley soon saw a resurgence, with new sawmills and peat harvesting operations opening up. The peasants were back in business, not to mention the underground trade in moonshine and hallucinogenic mushrooms. And so, the valley's fortunes turned around, a happy ending after all. Along the entire border with Sweden, there is a string of Swedish shops where Norwegians go to buy booze and tobacco at cheaper prices. The borderlands are sparsely populated, making it an ideal spot for fishing and a quiet escape from city life. One summer, I went with a classmate from the rural gymnasium, though he later transferred to a vocational school, to a swamp near the border, hoping to find smoky quartz to make jewelry. We stopped at one of the border stores, bought some booze and cigars, and then walked 10 miles to a small cave near where the swamp begins. A year before, we had set up a place to stay in that cave with barbecue and other supplies. It had taken quite a bit of effort to drag that rusty barbecue from a dump through the forest, but it was worth it. The cave immediately became cozy, as if it were not in the middle of nowhere, but instead near a place where people often visited. By the way, there are many such small caves in the area, and in some of them, Rock paintings and stone tools have been found. The paintings are eerie, depicting people with animal heads, various symbols, and, most unsettling of all, human footprints carved into the stone. Despite this, there are no tourists in the area since it is too remote, and archaeologists rarely discuss these finds. Many years ago, a causeway made of planks had been laid across the swamp, but it was now partially rotten. Still, it was passable. Early the next morning, we set out across the swamp to find our coveted quartz. A frightened snipe flew out from under a dwarf birch bush as we walked. The causeway was surprisingly dry, despite the haze of fog and dew covering the swamp, and there were places where frost could be seen on the moss, even though it was summer. What made us uneasy at first were the blue lights blinking in the morning twilight on the edge of the swamp to our right. We knew that swamp methane can create a glow at night, but we had never seen it so clearly visible in the twilight. Moreover, the lights seemed to move. They blinked in one place, then traveled along the edges of the swamp for about 5 meters before disappearing. We recalled that in the past, it was believed that these swamp lights were the spirits of people who had drowned in the swamp, and that thought made us uneasy. Then, as the sun rose, we encountered something even more frightening. In the middle of the swamp, we discovered wet footprints on the causeway. Clear, fresh prints of a child's barefoot feet. The causeway was dry, and the footprints appeared as if the child had just walked there. The strange thing was that the footprints did not follow the causeway straight. There were gaps, as though the child had occasionally stepped off the causeway into the swamp. But there were no prints in the swamp itself, especially since most of the swamp around the causeway was a quagmire, impossible to walk through. What could a barefoot child be doing out here, 10 miles from the nearest home? And judging by the freshness of the prints, the child would have been visible from a distance, even before we saw the tracks. If the child had wandered into the swamp, they would have become trapped in the muck. I could not help but think about the connection between these footprints and the ones carved in the rock paintings. Without saying a word to each other, we turned around and hurried back to the cave, our nerves on edge. When we arrived, we discovered that all of our food, booze, and even the barbecue had disappeared. Who would steal our supplies in the middle of the forest early in the morning, especially a heavy, rusty barbecue that had been sitting there for a year? We ran back to the road, cursing, and reached it in less than an hour, panting. We could not wait to leave. After we caught the bus, I looked out the window and saw something that made my blood run cold. A rusty barbecue sitting by the side of the road. It was our barbecue. No one could have dragged it from the cave to the side of the road in such a short amount of time, especially not in 10 minutes from the turnoff to the trail. That was completely and utterly impossible. My friend did not see it, and when I pointed it out, he refused to believe me. I mean, I could scarcely believe it myself. Understandably, after everything that had happened to us, we had had enough of the paranormal. We never went back, not even to retrieve the barbecue. We have never been back to that spot, ever.